because a lot of people who work in the field, they are working with the frail and needy elderly, and that is where their expertise is based, that's where their identities are based, that's how they get their funding. And it is deeply unsettling to ask people to revisit the way they see the population that they work with and their own, attitude toward those people and their own attitude toward their own aging. And it is a very hard thing to ask people to do, and a lot of people don't want to hear it. But still, of course, it would be much better if they were able to see aging in all its variety and to understand that even people who are deeply, frail and, not able to be independent in lots of ways are still, autonomous people with enormous diversity who don't want to be lumped in together and want to be seen as individuals with full lives on whatever terms they're able to manage. The hallmark of any ism is to think that people who belong to a group are alike. And the AARP did a study with the USC in 2007 in which, most people, they knew that older people, wanted to work and were healthy enough to work, but they said older people were sexless, and I think they used the word senile, and pretty much alike. People don't age out of sex and intimacy. Why? And the assumption that people would is itself incredibly sexist. Why would you stop? And even if it's not, sexual intercourse, touch. Advertising continues to target this prized, youth demographic. I think it's 24 to 37. Even though older people have more money and way more discretionary income. I mean, older people are also, there are many who live in poverty, so these are, complicated blanket statements to make. But it sort of makes me laugh that this is a case where ageism trumps even the profit motive. People don't want to make products that old people will buy because they'll get old people cooties. And older people themselves don't want to buy them because they will make them look old. I mean, that is a case where internalized ageism, with older people who don't want to go to the senior center because it's full of old people. People who won't use a walker or a wheelchair because the stigma is so great, even when the alternative is never leaving your house. There is a term in media studies which is pretty chilling. It's called symbolic annihilation. And it's what happens when you don't represent people like, say, older women in sexy roles in Hollywood movies. I think, what did I read, that there are more children in Hollywood movies than women over 45, something like that. I'm not sure I have it exactly. And older people are hugely underrepresented. It is way worse for women than men because there's an enormous overlap between ageism and sexism. And when you don't see people, they cease to exist for you. And when they do appear, they tend to be like Homer Simpson, really, cranky old coot, or the kindly passive grandmother rocking in her chair. And those don't do much to, to diversify our notion of aging either. And it's important to show, older people being cranky. That's okay. But they can't be all cranky all the time. You need to show people of all ages in all their diversity, and they need to be represented in proportion to their percentage, to their existence in the population at large. Otherwise, if you don't see people, they become invisible, and so do the problems and issues that affect them. What you hear a lot about is aging in place and how people want to be able to live in their homes, but that's double-edged as well, because isolation is the biggest risk factor for aging poorly. It correlates actually directly to shorter lives. So we all need to have friendships with people our whole life long, and as you get older, people do die. So I am a huge fan of the absolute necessity of making friendships across generations and holding on to them, because if you have a 20-year-old friend who comes and brings you soup or plays canasta with you or whatever, you can't think anymore that kids are selfish, because they're not. If you are a younger person who goes to the opera with your friend Phil, who's 80, or whatever it happens to be, the activity, then you know that old people don't live boring, monotonous lives. You can't have stereotypes when you have friendships, meaningful relationships with people who cross that boundary. But I think we need to really work to every way that we can to make places where people of different ages come together over an interest group or over a mutual need, and then the friendships will sustain themselves. People want friends.